How well do you really know your neighbors and their secrets? Anything could be lurking behind their walls and closed doors. Are they as intrigued by you as you are about them? Some of the neighbors in these stories might have wished for greater space between themselves and the people living just beyond their walls. Welcome, fellow chill seekers, to Lady Grimm, where the veil between our world and the unknown grows thin. Welcome to Lady Grimm, where the paranormal comes alive. It's happening. I'm shuddering and shaking in my closet, dialing 911, trying to get my thoughts together so I can remember everything. I hear his footsteps in the hallway, getting closer, his voice calling for Sabrina. Then I feel the storm of panic and my mind goes dark. Let me back up. 2 weeks ago, my roommate and best friend unintentionally set my current nightmare in motion just before she traveled to Belgium for work. Her job kept her overseas for months at a time, making her an easy roommate to have. She always paid her bills on time and was only in the house a few weeks a year. Before Sabrina left on her last trip, she hired a handyman to fix the back door which led to the kitchen of our house. There's something wrong with the door's alignment, and getting the back door locked properly was a chore. We'd been leaving it unlocked lately. Sabrina worried for my safety now that I'd be alone again, even though we have Ring cameras on the front and back doors and a motion camera in the living room. But really, I know she worries more about my health. I have epilepsy and take medication that keeps the seizures under control. With my meds, the seizures are rare. I know Sabrina had meant well, but she was a last-minute kind of person and hired someone on the fly in the whirlwind before her trip. Mike knocked on the door on the afternoon Sabrina left. Opening the door, I saw a thin, tall man wearing a black hoodie and a dirty baseball hat and jeans. He also had a backpack over his shoulder. No toolbox, just the backpack. He grinned when he saw me and stepped closer. I instinctively narrowed the opening in the door, asking him what he wanted. He leaned oddly into the space of the open door, pushing his mouth into the gap, like he had a secret to tell. He loudly announced someone had called him to fix the door. My sensitive nose caught a whiff of him. He smelled musty, like an old attic. It took me a second to process what he'd said, but then I realized this was the guy Sabrina must have hired, and wasn't some salesman or worse. I rolled my eyes at myself. I'd been watching too many true crime videos lately. I opened the door and watched him run his hand slowly along the edge of the door frame as he stared at me. I explained to him that it was the back door and he should meet me at the back of the house. I closed and locked the door. Sabrina may have called him, but I wasn't just going to let any stranger into my house. I met him at the back door and showed him the issue with the lock. He looked at it briefly, all the while fidgeting with his backpack zipper. He said he'd be back the next day to fix it, and we agreed on a time. After saying our goodbyes, I closed the unlockable door and turned away. But Mike didn't move. He was watching me through the window in the door, and when he saw me look back at him, he waved at me, unsmiling and otherwise standing perfectly still. His posture was odd, not turned away like he would be if he was leaving, but standing squarely in front of the door like he was waiting for more. We looked at each other for long enough that I was completely unnerved by his creepy waving. I turned away and moved farther back into the house, where I didn't think he could see me, and when I turned back, he was gone. I looked out the front window, but there was no car. He had just disappeared. It was hard to imagine a contractor without a vehicle, but nothing about this guy was normal. The next day, his arrival time came and went, and Mike never showed up. I was relieved. I really didn't want to deal with him again. I let Sabrina know and told her I'd hire someone else. Which I did. I hired a professional contractor with good reviews and experience, and the door was fixed that day. I didn't think about it again until I got a knock at the front door a few days later. It was the usual mail delivery time, so I didn't think to check my Ring camera. I wish I had. Opening the door, I saw Mike standing there, and immediately closed it to just a crack. He quickly leaned too close to the opening and asked me why I'd left him a bad review online. I had no idea what he was talking about. That's when he asked me if I was Sabrina, and it all came together. She must have left him a bad online review, and now he was standing here, angry at me. I told him I wasn't Sabrina, apologized, and closed the door. Through the Ring camera, I watched him clench his fists, and then yell through the door that I had to remove the review today, and he'd be back to fix the door. When I didn't respond, he faced the camera, waving again. He waved for 3 awkward minutes, turned, and left. I hoped he'd gotten the hint. The next day, when I was gone for work, I got the Ring notification and checked the app to see Mike standing at my door, repeatedly ringing the bell. Before leaving, he faced the camera for a few seconds, and then tried the doorknob. This was getting out of control. The next day was Saturday, and I was making breakfast when I heard the intrusive sound of the back doorknob jiggling. Startled, I turned and saw Mike with his hand on the door. He was looking through the window at me with a blank stare. He yelled at me that he needed the negative review removed and continued to jiggle the doorknob. As I reached for my phone, I saw him opening his backpack. Then I yelled, "I'm calling the police!" He turned and left. I called them anyway, but they just warned me to keep my doors locked and to call them if he came back. While I was at work today, my Ring camera caught Mike at the back door again. Horrified, I watched him look directly at the camera, staring at it for 8 long minutes until finally leaving. Now I really felt like I was in danger. Once I was home, there were no more camera notifications. At bedtime that night, I locked my bedroom door, just in case. In the morning, I'd have to call Sabrina to find out more about this guy she had hired. I also decided to visit the police station and see what I could do to protect myself. I hadn't been asleep long when the Ring detected movement at the back door, followed by the living room camera alert. I jumped out of bed with my phone and ran to the closet. I knew it was Mike. It was finally happening. As I shuddered and shook in my closet, I dialed 911 and tried to get my thoughts together so I would remember everything. I heard his footsteps in the hallway getting closer, his voice calling for Sabrina. Then I felt the storm of panic and my mind went dark. I woke up coughing, my throat burning, and I pulled at the rope around my neck. 3 uniformed cops were peering over me as I recovered from the seizure. One of the 3 asked me if I was Sabrina, and I shook my head. Another cop was in the hallway, going through the familiar backpack. I saw him dump the bag's contents onto my floor. Another rope, a hunting knife, and a set of handcuffs. He also found a wallet and read aloud, Mike Rosello, 3840 West Porterfield Lane. The man that had broken into my house, the man the police found tightening the rope around my neck, squeezing the breath from my convulsing body, was my neighbor. It's been 3 weeks since I moved into my new house in the country. Well, not quite the country, but it's outside the suburbs of Savannah where I used to work. Now I work from my comfortable home office facing my front yard. I have 2 neighbors that I haven't met, just waved to. The rest of our road is wooded, not yet developed. The first neighbor is to my right. They're a couple with a young daughter, and I hear them playing in the yard sometimes. I wave to them when I get my mail, and they wave back to me. I think there must be grandparents that live with them too. I saw an older couple walking through my backyard towards their house the first night I moved in. The second neighbor is to my left, an older couple that enjoys their raised back porch in the evenings. The way my house sits, I can see them sitting there at dusk, side by side, enjoying the cool evenings. If they see me, they wave, and I wave back. Every evening, just after the sun goes down, I hear 7 loud pops, which seem to come from the woods somewhere behind our little row of houses. It sounds like firecrackers or gunshots, and being from the South, I just figured someone was in the habit of target practicing at that hour before night sets in. I make a mental note of asking my neighbors when I finally meet them. As the sun starts to set, I see a car rumble down the short road. A realtor's ad in the back window. A man in a polo shirt hops out with 2 for sale signs. And from my office, I can see him carrying the first one to the family with the young girl's house and hammer it into the ground. Then he picks up the second sign and carries it over to the front yard of the older couple's house. I was baffled. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out to talk to the realtor. As I approached, he looked up and jumped as I said hello. He clutched his chest and laughed a bit, explaining that I'd startled him. Sorry, man, this whole place gives me the creeps. I looked at him with a confused look on my face. I asked him why everyone was selling. He looked blankly at me and saw that I was completely lost. You don't know what happened here? I listened as he described the horrific murders of the 3 families that lived in these houses. Just after that big heat wave we had last August, the young guy, the dad, just snapped. He came out and shot everyone on the street, then took himself out. The mailman reported a bad smell a few days later, and that's when the police found them. They were probably just out here enjoying the evening after the sun went down when it all happened. The family playing with their daughter in the yard, the older couple strolling over to visit the young family, and the couple sitting together on their deck. As he finished his story, he got into his car and started the engine. You're brave to live here, man. He nodded towards the row of houses. The realtor's face drained of color as we heard 7 distinct pops. It was sundown. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying my stories. Leave a comment, subscribe. Let me know you're out there. My next-door neighbors were weird, but in the spirit of being open-minded, I didn't share my thoughts about them with my daughter. Something was off about them, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Their daughter was around my daughter's age, but she didn't attend her school. I heard from another neighbor she was homeschooled and didn't think much of it. until I saw her running through the woods towards the road in her pajamas one late fall evening. We'd just come back from ice hockey practice, and it was already dark. I almost hit her with my minivan. She'd obviously been crying and looked upset. Behind her, I could see her mother pointing a flashlight at her through the trees. "Amelia, come in for prayers." The girl stopped running immediately, looked at us, wiped her face, and turned back towards her mother. We watched as she grabbed her daughter's wrist, and they turned back towards the house. My daughter and I looked at each other and drove up our driveway in silence. Once inside, my daughter said they gave her the creeps and told me sometimes she hears crying coming through the trees from that side of our house. I told her it was probably just the TV. But after that night, I started paying more attention. I noticed their curtains were always drawn, even during the day when most of us had them open to let in the warmth of the sun this time of year. The only person I ever saw leave the house was her mother, never Amelia. I wondered if this was for religious reasons, but it still seemed odd. That weekend was Halloween, and my daughter and her friends dressed up and went trick-or-treating throughout the neighborhood. Of course, our neighbor's porch light was dark, the curtains were drawn as usual, and there were no lights inside that we could see either. The few kids that rang their door left with it unanswered. I started feeling sorry for Amelia, missing out on the usual fun kid things, and decided I'd do something for Thanksgiving. That would surely be a holiday they celebrated, right? Our family had a tradition of baking bread the day before Thanksgiving so we could save precious oven time for the turkey and side dishes. We made an extra loaf of sourdough and took it next door. Amelia's mother opened the door and looked at us. Beyond her, I could see Amelia sitting in the back room, a book in her lap. She looked startled and stood up, the book sliding off her lap and onto the floor. It was a prayer book, and Amelia fumbled awkwardly to pick it up off the ground. She was looking anxiously at the back of her mother's head, who was still staring at us blankly. Suddenly, it was as though an eerie, super-wide smile mask had snapped onto her expressionless face, and she locked her unnerving gaze on my daughter. But nothing about that woman's face was friendly. I quickly explained that we'd been baking and made them some bread for the holiday. From the back of the other room, we heard Amelia cry out that she loved to bake and would make us a pie. We told her that would be lovely, and her mother took the bread from my hands, nodded, and closed the door as we stood there. The whole encounter was so strange. I shushed my daughter on the walk back as her eyes were wide and incredulous. I knew she was going to tell me they were weird. Later that evening, we heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find only an apple pie in a small cardboard box on the landing. I guessed it was from Amelia. We put it in the fridge for tomorrow's feast. My brother and his family came for the day, and we had a great time, which of course culminated in dinner, followed by dessert. The pie was delicious, even if my daughter joked about Amelia's mom poisoning us. I told her she was overreacting, but the thought had gone through my mind too. As my daughter's fork cut through the warmed pie, she stopped mid-bite, pulling a piece of parchment paper from the apple filling. There was writing smeared on it, the letters H-E-L, and then the rest of the ink was unintelligible, likely dissolved with the pie filling. My daughter ran to the trash can to spit out her mouthful of pie. I told her Amelia had probably just accidentally dropped it into the filling while she was baking, but we threw the rest of the pie away. The next day, I returned the pie plate to Amelia's house. Her mother answered the door, and I could hear someone in the living room, presumably Amelia. I complimented her daughter's baking and playfully suggested that she should be more cautious about any paper note mishaps in the filling next time. Her mother's plastic smile fractured for an instant, but she quickly regained her composure. She nodded and closed the door. As I walked back home, the curtain at the back of the house shifted, and I saw Amelia sobbing, her eyes terrified and pleading, as I stopped, staring in shock, until she disappeared behind the curtain. That was the last time I ever saw Amelia. I welcome you to watch another round of stories by clicking the playlist at the end of this video. I also have a Lady Grimm store and spooky-themed coloring books for sale. Their links are in the description. If you're still here, I thank you for listening. See you here next Friday for my next round of stories.